Greetings, my name is Darren. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'll be continuing with my basic introduction to opera. Opera is a type of drama set to music, whose important lines are sung rather than spoken. It's like a musical to some extent, but the key difference is that it contains stronger and heavier emotional and dramatic content. In my earlier episode, I presented the core element in opera, intensity, the most important type of experience opera provides. Today, I'll be presenting some of the other types of experiences opera has to provide. Apart from intensity, there are 8 other elements among the 9 elements of opera which enrich the overall musical experience each operatic masterpiece offers. I'll call these 8 other elements the booster elements in opera. As I mentioned before, every masterpiece must have intensity if it's to secure for itself a lasting place in the repertoire. However, there are many operatic masterpieces which contain more than intensity. Besides intensity, they also offer one or more other types of musical experiences. There can be intensity and one or more booster elements. To make you understand what these booster elements are about, I further classified them under 3 categories. The categories are dramatic boosters, vocal boosters, and flavor boosters. The first category of booster elements I'll be presenting is the dramatic boosters. An operatic masterpiece is a type of drama set to music, whose music moves us with its intensity. A dramatic booster will enhance the drama in the masterpiece, heightening our interest in its story. There are 3 types of dramatic boosters. 1. Comedy or the comic element, 2. Transcendence, and 3. Shock, which I'll be presenting in that order. The first dramatic booster I'm presenting, comedy or the comic element, is self-explanatory. Most operatic masterpieces are tragedies, but there are some which are comedies. These comedies might have been written centuries ago, and the humor in their lines might have expired quite some time back, yet they retain a significant amount of freshness. Those comedies have memorable characters who can be like old friends when you get to know them. Even if you will only revisit them years later, their qualities which attracted you to them will prove undiminished by time. The hilarious situations they landed themselves in will still make you laugh. The things these situations tell us about people and society will remain relevant. After all, if academics had proven human nature hasn't really changed much for thousands of years, how different can the audiences of past centuries be? Moreover, although the humor in the scripts or libretti of the comedies might have been long past their sell-by date, they are highly adaptable for the stage. If you read them, you'll notice that they don't refer much to their settings. This makes it easier for the directors to transfer these comedies to another time period or location, like our era, without compromising their essence. By doing so, their message on people and society is preserved in a way that makes it clearer to us. Furthermore, the libretti don't describe the characters in the comedies much, so they can take on an infinite variety of identities. This way, these comedies can be retold any number of times on stage, but some retellings can reveal something new about the characters, giving their stories a new spin. To show you how all this work in practice, I'll be using a musical excerpt from Rossini's Il Turco in Italia. This excerpt is a duet by the lead soprano and the bassobuffo for this opera. A bassobuffo is a bass baritone specializing in comic roles. The lead soprano plays a young woman called Fiorilla who's addicted to having affairs with other men. The bassobuffo plays Fiorilla's much older husband, Don Geronio. Don Geronio has been frustrated by Fiorilla's endless adultery for some time. Finally, Fiorilla's latest lover, the Turk in Italy, whom the opera is named after, pushed too much for Don Geronio to bear. Fiorilla made Don Geronio pay his deepest respect to the Turk when he barged in onto the rendezvous she was having with the Turk in their house. That incident made Don Geronio decide to confront his wife about her adultery. The duet we'll be listening to is that confrontation scene. It begins with Don Giovanni asking Fiorilla what she wants from him so he can win her love. Fiorilla answers that Don Giovanni is to keep quiet and never question her behavior. Don Giovanni then asks what if he hears about her affairs. Fiorilla answers he's to pretend to hear nothing. Don Giovanni then asks what if he sees her having affairs. Fiorilla answers he's to pretend to see nothing. Let's hear this musical conversation with soprano Olga Peretiatko playing the role of Fiorilla and bassobuffo Alessandro Corbelli playing the role of Don Giovanni.
La signora, per piacere alla signora, cosa fa vuoi sapere?
Cosa mi deve piacere? Ma che non lo so fare! Ma che mi deve piacere? Ma che non lo so fare!
Ma si ascolta!
Sì, come sordo!
Ma se vedo!
Si fa il cielo!
Don Giovanni insists on talking to Fiorilla about her affairs. Fiorilla answers he only appears stupid. Don Giovanni tells Fiorilla he won't condone her receiving her lovers in their house anymore. He'll beat her if she disobeys. Fiorilla can't care less.
Alle corte in casa mia non va turchi né italiani. Ma mi scappa
Che pazzia!
qualche cosa dalle mani.
Fiorilla changes tactics. First, she portrays herself as the innocent one, then as one being abused. Finally, she shames Don Giovanni into feeling awful for denying her the right to a less boring life.
Addio, coraggio.
Fiorilla now scolds Don Giovanni for objecting to her affairs. He's forced to apologize for disapproving. It isn't enough for Fiorilla. She wants to make him really sorry. Fiorilla decides to punish Don Giovanni by receiving more lovers in their house more often from now on.
Maltrattarmi, spaventarmi, devo sapere maltrattarmi, spaventarmi.
Perdonate.
Mi lasciate,
Fiorinetta,
Vendetta,
Fiorinina.
mio di cuore, per punirmi per quel Dio, chi la mangia mi intorno, mi ne pazzo notte e giorno, divertirmi in libertà, notte e giorno, divertirmi in libertà.
Giovanni painfully regrets upholding his rights as a husband and begs for Fiovilla's forgiveness. Fiovilla celebrates her victory. She thinks Don Giovanni deserves such treatment.
Dio, amore mio, cosa ho fatto? In pace io torno, gusto fresco, notte e giorno, questa è troppa crudeltà. Notte e giorno, questa è troppa crudeltà.
Ecco qui, come le sembra, col marito
E più matta morirà, allo detto nacque matta, allo detto nacque matta, allo detto nacque matta, e più matta morirà, e più matta morirà, e più matta morirà, si morirà.
The humor of this duet is seeing how Fiovilla turns her situation around. She deserves to be reproached by Don Giovanni for her affairs, let alone for bringing her lovers back home. Yet, instead of being made to feel guilty, she's decided to bring more lovers home. Although it's now been 2 centuries, Fiovilla's simply outrageous and Don Giovanni simply pathetic. If you think it's wrong to laugh at Don Giovanni allowing himself to be bullied by his wife to that extent, she will receive her just desserts later in the opera. However, there's another way of perceiving Don Giovanni's suffering. Did you notice how he didn't renounce his wife even when her bullying justified it? Don Giovanni will be rewarded for his stubborn love. The second dramatic booster I'm presenting is transcendence. What this transcendence refers to is the transcendence of reality. We are all living in the real world. When we listen to some operatic masterpieces, we can feel ourselves being transported to another world. Their music acts on our imagination as well as through our senses to create an alternate reality. The music paints pictures of this reality in our minds. The texture of the music plays on our sense of touch. At the same time, the harmony of the music goes through our ears to our hearts. These combine to give us the perception that in that moment, we are in a different place. The dramatic structure of the operatic masterpieces we are listening to then has such a high level of drama that when we reach this new destination, we feel we are confronted with something which can only be created by a superior intellect. We come into contact with ideas that seem much bigger than us, an opportunity to transcend ourselves for us to attain a more advanced state of consciousness awaits. Orchestra and singers work together to generate this effect. One composer, above all, is consistently able to achieve this in more masterpieces than any other. His name is Wagner. For his operatic masterpieces to enable a person to progress from one state of consciousness to another, they must be formidable. Normally, we'll regard such progress as something requiring extraordinary steps like consuming mind-altering substances or participating in spiritual exercises. I won't deny that Wagner does impose comparable demands on his listeners, but it's possible to journey through his operas without as heavy a toll. To give you a preview of that journey, I'll be taking you through a musical excerpt from one of Wagner's easier operas, Lohengrin. This excerpt is from a duet by the title role and the heroine of the opera, Elsa. Elsa is the heiress to the Duchy of Brabant. At the beginning of the opera, Elsa had been accused of murdering her little brother, the heir, after he disappeared during their walk. As though out of a dream, the knight appeared. The knight offered to fight for Elsa and take her under his protection, but on one condition. That condition is Elsa must not ask him where he came from and who he is, which she accepted. The knight defeats Elsa's accuser in a trial by combat and asks Elsa for her hand in marriage. The wedding ceremony is disrupted by the wife of Elsa's accuser. She declares that the knight seems suspicious because he used magic to win the trial earlier. Although the peace at the ceremony is later restored, Elsa begins to suspect the knight. On the first night of their marriage in the bridal chamber, Elsa's dream will come to a cruel end in the duet we'll be listening to. This duet, known as the bridal chamber scene after the place where it happens, is sung by tenor Piotr Begzala playing the role of the knight and soprano Anya Hateros playing the role of Elsa. In the first half of this excerpt, the knight sings how being with Elsa makes him drunk with a happiness that binds him with magic he'll gladly submit to. In the second half of this excerpt, the knight sings how his heart knew Elsa was the woman destined to be his wife when they first met. The orchestra creates an atmosphere which instills a sense of inner peace in us. It transports us to the fairy tale world where the knight is living with Elsa in absolute bliss. Begzala complements this by singing as though his character's truly from such a world. Begzala sings with the beautiful poetry of a fairy tale being, but this poetry doesn't fade on the slightest touch like fairy wings. As appropriate for the knight he's playing, Begzala's poetry carries a sense of conviction which gives it weight. Let's listen to the excerpt. And now to witness the high level of drama in Wagner's transcendental masterpiece by hearing a series of excerpts leading to its conclusion. The next excerpt is also from the bridal chamber scene. Elsa's suspicion has mutated into a fear that the knight will dump her. This fear has reached the point she thinks the knight might abandon her anytime. The knight fails to pacify her. Thinking the knight will leave anyway, Elsa desperately asks him about his identity. The knight's warning falls flat on her. Elsa's questions grow more insistent. The knight loses control of his magic under Elsa's persistent questioning. Elsa's accuser, who's been lying in ambush, is now able to attack him but is struck dead. The knight has no choice but to reveal his identity. Both Hateros and Begzala are really good here. You can sense Elsa's hysteria and the knight's agony in their performance. To experience that, let's hear them in action. In the next excerpt, the knight will reveal his identity. His revelation is a musical number known as the Grail narration. We'll only be listening to the last part of it. The knight has revealed that he's one of a group of knights sent by the Holy Grail, a divine relic, to redress injustices. When this part begins, the knight explains why his identity had been secret. The Grail is too sacred for ordinary men to be aware of its presence among them in the form of his followers. Hence, as one of them, he has to leave now that his identity is exposed. Initially, Bexala, playing the knight, sings calmly since he's just explaining the reason for his secrecy to the others. Later, he becomes emotional since the knight now blames Elsa for not having trusted him enough, which has led to this abrupt farewell. He deeply regrets what's happened. It greatly pains him to leave, but he has no choice. Towards the end, the knight discloses his name as Lohengrin, son of the head of the Knights of the Grail. We'll now listen to this classic.
Doch ist des Knalles Siegen, enthüllt muss des Laienauge fliehen. Des Ritters Drum soll Zweifel ihr nicht hegen, erkennt ihr ihn. Dann muss ihr mein Vater Parsifal trägt seine Krone, ich will Lohengrin genau.
In the last excerpt, Lohengrin says goodbye to Elsa, but not before promising her brother will return and passing her a few keepsakes. This is a really tragic goodbye, considering how Elsa naively destroyed her dream marriage. We'll round out the section with this. The third dramatic booster I'm presenting is shock. You can see it as the opposite of transcendence. Earlier, I described transcendence as a musical experience that lifts you up to greatness. Shock, on the other hand, is a musical experience that unearths the dark side of humanity. The operatic masterpieces, which contain a shock factor, are full of ugly characters. They are ugly because there's something strongly disturbing or even disgusting about them. They may be sick in the mind or sick at heart. Opera is an art form which focuses a lot on the emotions of its characters. Through those grotesque characters I mentioned, the composers can now tackle negative emotions, especially unhealthy ones, and controversial topics which need discussion. This expands the range of content they can explore in their musical dramas. More importantly, the operatic masterpieces containing the shock factor are highly effective, probably too effective to some. The repulsive behavior of the Gothic characters in these operas and their mentally unbalanced thinking, which their interpreters bring to life during their performances, is like a spicy delicacy. Those operas' musical numbers are like the servings. Although the process of listening to them can be as agonizing as the fire in your mouth every serving leaves in its wake, their stimulating music will keep you at it until you're done with them. Just like how every spicy delicacy has its level of spiciness, the operas with the shock factor have their ranking. Not all opera lovers can stomach the operas with the greatest shock factor. They're either too agonizing or stimulating for them. To let you have an idea of what that fire in the mouth sensation each musical serving from those operas feels like, I'll start you on some excerpts from the opera with the lowest shock factor, Richard Strauss' Salome. Salome is the stepdaughter of King Herodes, Herod in English. Sick of life at King Herodes' court, she stumbles upon the underground reservoir where the prophet Yochanan, John the Baptist in English, has been imprisoned. Yochanan's speeches fascinate Salome. On her instructions, Yochanan is brought out of the reservoir. Salome expresses her interest in Yochanan by wanting to touch his body, which he rebuffs. Salome then rejects Yochanan's body and then tries to touch his hair, which he also rebuffs. Salome then rejects Yochanan's hair and decides to kiss him in the mouth. This excerpt is a part of the monologue Salome sings when she decides to kiss Yochanan. Salome is played by soprano Marlene Bistrom here. When Bistrom sings here, it sounds as if her character's madly in love with Yochanan. Let's hear it now. Didn't the music we just listened to sound extremely passionate? You may ask, what's shocking about it? What's shocking about Salome intending to kiss Yochanan? If Salome's attracted to Yochanan, it's perfectly normal, but she's already rejected his body. That rejection includes Yochanan's face, so why does she intend to kiss him? Salome only likes Yochanan's mouth because it's a hole where all his fascinating speeches come from. With this in mind, think about the music. Doesn't it sound disturbing to you when such strong love music is directed at a hole in someone else's body? Isn't Salome sick? Yet she can be sick in such a beautiful way. Doesn't this arouse a curiosity where Richard Strauss will take the opera? Let's listen to another excerpt which begins at the end of the monologue. Salome tries to kiss Yochanan. Yochanan rejects Salome. The captain who worships Salome and thus enabled her to visit Yochanan is tortured by her attraction to Yochanan. The captain's anguish increases. Wanting to preserve his image of Salome as a goddess, the captain has been begging her to leave, but she ignores him. In a desperate attempt to convince her, the captain commits suicide, which Salome hardly notices. Salome continues to try kissing Yochanan. Yochanan mistakes Salome's desire for her desire to receive guidance. We'll now try it.
Tia Herodia. Es liegt nur einer, der dich retten kann. Er ist in einem Garten auf dem See von Galiläa und redet zu seinen Jüngern.
Yochanan gives Salome the guidance he thinks she's seeking. He instructs her to seek Jesus. Hear how the singer playing Yochanan, bass baritone Evgeny Nikitin, uses his commanding voice to portray his character's prophetic charisma. The excerpt we just listened to was the closing section of Yochanan's guidance. Even after receiving such guidance, Salome still tries to kiss Yochanan. Yochanan sees that Salome is incorrigible, rejects her one final time, and returns to the reservoir, cursing her.
Lass mich deinen Mund küssen,
Ich will dich nicht ansehen, du bist verflucht, Salome,
The excerpt we heard was the last section of the duet between Salome and Yochanan. All four excerpts belong to that duet. Remember what I said about operas with a shock factor like Salome having a fire-in-the-mouth sensation in each musical serving? The fire from the first excerpt was Salome's disturbing attraction to Yochanan's mouth. The fire from the second excerpt was the captain's suicide. Isn't it shocking that the captain could suddenly kill himself in plain view before Yochanan and Salome, and the other two characters treat it as though it was nothing? How can anyone not react when someone kills themselves in front of them? The next fire is from the last excerpt. Salome's disturbing attraction has graduated to all-consuming hunger. Did you notice how Bistrom's singing reflected this? Her singing became more obsessive until the point it sounded mindless. Nevertheless, strangely enough, despite her character's worsening behavior, isn't it interesting how her music was always pleasant? Ugly characters in the operas with the shock factor unlimited to their women. They also include men. Let's meet one of them. After Salome's duet with Iokannan, Herodes, her stepfather, enters. Herodes is mentally unbalanced and morally corrupt. Salome is sick with life at court because she can sense Herodes lusting after her teenage body. This excerpt we'll be hearing introduces Herodes as a pervert. At the beginning of the excerpt, Herodias, Salome's mother, repeats her warning to Herodes not to target Salome. Herodes tries to harass Salome twice. During Herodes' first attempt, he offers Salome some wine received from the Roman emperor. Herodes asks Salome to drink from his cup so he can fantasize Salome indulging him sexually. Salome rejects Herodes. Herodes complains to Herodias, who approves. Herodes makes a second attempt, offering Salome some fruit. Herodes asks Salome to bite the fruit he will finish so she can give him another sexual fantasy. We'll now listen to the excerpt where Herodias is played by mezzo-soprano Doris Soffel and Herodes is played by tenor Lance Ryan. When you hear Ryan sing, notice how he gives his nasal singing voice an exaggerated finesse and a goodwill you instinctively distrust. Doesn't his singing and acting make you think Herodes is a creep?
Denkt mir Freiheit! Salome, komm, trink ein mit mir einen köstlichen Wein. Cäsar selbst hat ihn mir geschickt. Tauche deine kleinen Lippen hinein, deine kleinen roten Lippen, deine will ich die Wäsche nehmen.
Ich bin nicht durstig, Tetrarch.
Hörst du, wie sie mir antwortet? Die sei deine Tochter.
Sie hat recht, warum starrst du sie
Trink
an?
ein
Herodes is a character part, a role in opera which prioritizes acting over singing. Hence, his music doesn't have to sound pleasant, but naturally there are limits, because we are talking about music here. So far, we've seen and heard 5 excerpts from the opera Salome. 4 of them are shocking, and each one of them is more shocking than the last. Finally, we find ourselves before a pervert who tests our tolerance. Ironically, this is just past the halfway point of this opera, and is supposedly the least shocking opera among the operas with a shock factor. At this point, you might wonder why any person will continue with this. Later in the opera, Herodes will ask Salome to dance for him. Surprisingly, Salome will agree. Herodes is a pervert, so what type of dance do you think he wants from her? Preferably an erotic dance. Now, let's watch an excerpt of Salome's dance, known as the Dance of the Seven Views. By the way, this dance has such sensual music, its music can be performed standalone. There are times when the dance is actually performed by a ballerina on behalf of the singer, but in this performance, apparently Bistrom did it herself. Some of you might have heard that opera is a prestigious art form because it's a combination of art forms. Opera is a type of music. During the previous excerpts, we've seen that there's definitely drama in opera because the singers do need to act, whether it's through their voices, their movements, and or their body language. There's also the staging that makes us view them a certain way. Another thing the previous excerpts showed us is the poetry in opera, the lines the singers sing, which they need to interpret to express the emotions of the characters and bring the story to life. Dance, which we've just seen, is another art form in opera. Not all operas include dance because this depends on their format and or their story. In Salome's case, it's because of its story. About Salome's story, there's no doubt it has morality issues, but not all operas are like that. Opera is just like the movies where you have movies for children, movies that can be enjoyed by the family, and movies that can only be watched by adults. Salome just happens to be among those operas that are inappropriate for children. Aren't you curious to know how it will end? Previously, Salome has been resisting her stepfather Herodes' advances. However, now, she went a step even further and actively satisfied his sexual desire. Why would she do something like that? Salome has something in mind which is several times more shocking than the last excerpt which introduced us to a perverted stepfather. You might be able to wiki the answer, but knowing the answer is light years away from seeing and hearing it for yourself. Opera is about the experience after all, as I said earlier. If you stay with us, I promise that one day you will have the opportunity to experience for yourself what Salome will be doing. In the meantime, let's proceed to the next category of booster elements in opera, vocal boosters, in the subsequent part of this introduction. If you had fun watching this video, please help me like it. If you like to continue chasing this series, please subscribe to my channel. If you wish to express your views about it or discuss it further, please feel free to leave a comment. Thank you and stay tuned.